Buried beneath the red cliffs of Peru was a skull that didn't make sense. It was too big, too smooth, too heavy, and it was missing a bone every human is supposed to have. This wasn't a one-off. In 1928, archaeologist Julio Teo uncovered a mass grave in the Paracas desert. Over 300 skulls, all elongated, all thousands of years old, and none of them looked entirely human. The official explanation? Ritual head binding, a cultural practice found all over the world, pressing a baby's skull between boards to shape the head over time. But here's the problem. Binding changes shape, not volume. It doesn't make a skull heavier. It doesn't erase sutures. And it definitely doesn't fuse two parietal bones into one seamless plate. These weren't just different, they were engineered. Intentionally. Repeatedly. As if a whole society wasn't trying to imitate something else, but become it. Then came the DNA. In 2014, a controversial researcher, Brian Forster, took samples from a Paracas skull. Bone, hair, skin, a tooth. He sent them to an independent geneticist. What came back wasn't just shocking. It was impossible. Mitochondrial mutations, completely unrecognized. No match to Homo sapiens. No match to Neanderthals. Not even Denisovans. Just unknown. The geneticist wrote, "If these results hold, we are dealing with a new human-like creature. Not a descendant. Not a hybrid. Something outside the human family tree." And suddenly, a graveyard in Peru wasn't just an archaeological site. It became a question. What if our ancestry isn't entirely human? What if there was another branch? Because when Forster tested more skulls, he didn't find aliens. He found Europe. Thousands of years before the first ships ever crossed the Atlantic. Europe. Thousands of years before ships, before sails, before any known human dared map the oceans. That's where the DNA pointed. In 2016, Brian Forster released what he called the next phase. Genetic testing on the most elongated skull in the entire Paracas collection. Not just long, but unnatural. Sculpted like it was grown for something more than survival. He had bone powder tested. The result? Haplogroup T2b, a mitochondrial marker common in ancient Mesopotamia and Syria, regions tied to the early birth of civilization. Other skulls came back with H2a, another lineage, traced not to the Andes, but to Eastern Europe and the Black Sea. It was the kind of finding that should have shattered silence across every university archaeology lab. Because if real, these skulls weren't just biological outliers. They were evidence of a prehistoric migration that no textbook had ever written. And yet, none of it reached the journals. None of it made it to peer review. Forster never released the full raw data. The labs unnamed. The processes undocumented. And the geneticist still anonymous, hidden behind email quotes and mystery. But he was quoted saying this: "These sequences contain mutations unknown in any human, primate, or animal known so far. Not just exotic, not just ancient, unclassified. The skulls," he said, "could belong to a new human-like creature. A biological cousin so distant, it couldn't even interbreed with us." If that was true, then history missed something colossal. A civilization erased from our genetic memory. A being that once stood among us, left no descendants, but left its skulls behind. The academic world didn't buy it. They fired back. Hard. Contamination, they said. Mishandled samples. Hair touched by museum staff. Bones drilled with power tools. Not a discovery, just a failure in protocol. But Forster's supporters didn't care, because the claim had already lit a fire. What if the Paracas elite weren't just bound by ritual, but by genetics? What if their skulls weren't shaped to resemble gods, but to remember them? And just when it seemed the mystery couldn't go deeper, one skull, tested again, didn't just show European or Middle Eastern DNA. It showed something worse. A perfect match to a modern haplogroup. That shouldn't have been there at all. And yet it was. A genetic fingerprint not just ancient, but out of place. In 2016, Brian Forster revealed something even more baffling than unknown mutations. He wasn't just chasing mystery now, he was naming origins. H2a, T2b, haplogroups rooted in Europe and the Middle East. Not from Amazon, not Andean, not Native American, and certainly not from 3,000 years ago. These were lineages born in the cradles of civilization, around the Black Sea, through ancient Syria, down the pathways of Mesopotamia. The same DNA you'd expect in early Phoenician traders, Persian nobles, or the people who once walked Uar before its ziggurats fell. And now, those same markers were lighting up inside skulls pulled from beneath the red cliffs of Paracas. Skulls dated to around 700 BCE, over 2,000 years before Columbus ever reached the New World, centuries before the Inca Empire rose, or even dreamed of Machu Picchu. How did genetic material from the opposite side of the planet end up locked inside the remains of pre-Columbian Peruvians? And it wasn't just in the DNA. Some skulls had thin, reddish hair, others blonde, not dyed, not painted, real pigmentation, preserved through desert time. The kind of trait seen in 1 to 2% of modern humans, now sitting atop a face carved by centuries of sand. And anatomically, the skulls refused to follow rules. Several had a single parietal bone, no sagittal suture, a dome fused solid clean, not broken, not malformed, just designed differently. And suddenly, what looked like a ritual started to feel like a memory. But here's the thing. Every geneticist watching this unfold had the same burning question. Was this real migration or modern contamination? Because a strand of DNA in a sealed tomb means one thing, but a strand pulled from a skull kept in a museum, handled for decades, means something else entirely. And yet, what came next wasn't found in a lab. It came from the shape of the skulls themselves, the structure, the proportions, because even stranger than the DNA was how the skulls had changed shape. Changed, but not broken. Stretched, sculpted, engineered, yet undeniably human. By 2016, the Paracas skulls had sparked global frenzy. But while some shouted alien, forensic anthropologists began digging for something far more intimate: culture. Because when you step back from the DNA, what you're left with is shape. Some skulls towered like obsidian masks, elongated beyond normal proportions. Others smooth domes, no sagittal suture, one solid plate instead of two. Brian Forster called it impossible. He said human skulls couldn't grow like that. But science disagreed. Anthropologists, including Dr. Christine White, published a peer-reviewed study in 2016 that explained everything. Artificial cranial deformation, a practice as old as 4000 BCE, seen from the Pacific Islands to ancient Ukraine. In Paracas, it was most intense between 700 BCE and 100 CE. Families would bind their infants' heads with cloth and wood, sometimes for years. The soft, malleable skull would reshape over time, forming elongated vaults and flattened occipitals. And yes, extreme binding could erase sutures. The sagittal suture could fuse early under pressure, mimicking what Forster claimed was non-human. Even the cranial volume wasn't supernatural. A detailed review found the largest Paracas skulls held 1,655 cubic centimeters, within the normal human range, which spans from 900 to 1,800 cubic centimeters. No mutations, no hybrids, just humans, marked by tradition. But why would a people stretch their children's heads? Not for pain, not for cruelty, for status, identity, power. In Paracas, skull shaping was elite, a mark of nobility, not deformity. Your head became your story, pressed and bound before your first words. Every ridge, every curve, a symbol you carried until the grave. But just as the mystery of the skulls settled into science, something else emerged from the desert. Something even stranger. Because in 2017, near the lines of Nazca, a new kind of body was found. Smaller, wrapped in powder, with only 3 fingers. And while Paracas carried DNA myths, this one came with a whole different kind of legend. One not shaped by cloth or bone, but possibly by fraud. Nazca, 2017. A desert already etched with ancient messages, giant lines only visible from the sky. And now a body, white as ash, rigid, wrapped in powder like it was being preserved or hidden. It had no ears, no navel, 3 fingers, 3 toes, a skull that mimicked Paracas, but smaller, narrower, not natural. They named her Maria. Unveiled not in a lab, but on YouTube, by Jamie Mawson, a Mexican journalist, known more for UFO exposés than archaeological finds. Standing beside a display case, he called it historic. A non-human being, not part of Earth's evolutionary tree. He wasn't alone. A group calling themselves the Alien Project backed him. The story spread fast, through fringe media, blogs, even a crowdfunding site. In their hands, Maria wasn't a mummy. She was a miracle. And then came the number. DNA tests, they claimed, showed 30% of Maria's genome didn't match anything in known genetic databases. Not human, not primate, not an animal, just unknown. It echoed across headlines. 30% unknown. And the world leaned in. Carbon dating allegedly placed her between 245 and 410 AD, the same period as the fall of the Roman Empire, before the rise of the Inca, before the Nazca lines were even complete. But this time, something was different. Maria wasn't the only one. More bodies appeared. Smaller, grayer, wrapped in the same white dust, with elongated heads and tiny bone frames. They called one Wawada, a supposed infant. Another had what looked like eggs inside. In 2023, Mawson returned, this time to Mexico's Congress. 2 of these bodies were placed under glass and paraded before lawmakers. Under oath, he called them biological evidence of a non-human presence. And yet, real scientists, quietly, methodically, were preparing their rebuttal. They'd already seen the X-rays, the CT scans, the false joints, the glued seams, and they had tested the DNA too. Because what Mawson never mentioned was that back in 2017, he had sent a sample to Canada, to a lab that doesn't chase headlines. And what they found broke the story. When the results came back in 2017, they weren't vague. They weren't partial. They were final. From a certified ancient DNA facility in Ontario, Lakehead University's PaleoDNA laboratory. Sample, tissue and bone from the so-called Nazca non-human entity. Result, Homo sapiens. 99 to 100% match. Male. Human. Nothing alien. No unknown genome. No evolutionary break. Stephen Frat Pietro, the lab's technical manager, confirmed it publicly. And then he said something that hit harder than the data. We never heard from them again. Because those results were buried. Meanwhile, in Peru, a parallel investigation had already begun. July 2017. The country's Ministry of Culture and Prosecutor's Office launched a full forensic review. They seized some of the specimens, ordered scans, pulled back the wrappings, and what they saw was no ancient mystery. CT scans revealed mismatched bones, fused together with modern adhesives. Spinal vertebrae rotated the wrong way. Human hands restructured into 3 fingers. Skulls packed with clay and wires. One torso, built using the pelvis of an animal and the limbs of a small child. These weren't just fakes. They were desecrations. In January 2024, Peru's ministry held a press conference. Standing before cameras, forensic archaeologist Flavio Estrada declared, "They are not extraterrestrials. They are dolls, assembled using bones of animals and humans from this planet, held together with modern glue." The World Congress on Mummy Studies condemned the hoax. Customs officials intercepted 2 more figures being smuggled from Lima to Mexico. Fake again. And beneath all the scientific anger was something deeper, something sacred, because these weren't just bones. They were once people, looted from tombs, cut apart, rearranged, for clicks and spectacle. Peru called it a cultural crime, a spiritual offense, a manipulation of the dead. And yet, Mawson wasn't done. In September 2023, 6 years after the first exposure, he stood again before Mexico's Congress. Same bodies, same claims, same 30% unknown DNA line, knowing what had already been proven, knowing what had already been buried. So the question wasn't just, why now? It was, what was he hiding this time? The answer came under glass. September 2023. Mexico's Congress. Live cameras. Seated politicians. And once again, 2 tiny bodies unveiled, like relics from a forgotten world. Same three-fingered hands. Same dry gray skin. Same theatrical silence. Jamie Mawson stood, hand on chest, and declared them non-human. Biological evidence of extraterrestrial life. Here, in the heart of government. He even brought radiologists. Supporters. DNA charts. Claimed carbon dating placed them at over 1,000 years old. Claimed 30% of their DNA couldn't be matched to any species on Earth. It was déjà vu, with better lighting. But behind the velvet stage, science had already caught up. Again, the Peruvian Ministry of Culture responded within weeks. They knew these bodies, had scanned them, dissected them. In January 2024, their forensic team presented the full breakdown to the world. Same bones, same glue, same fraud. One hand was reassembled from a real human child. Phalanx bones fused into a tridigit design. Another torso combined parts of birds, mammals, and powdered resin. No real mummification. No internal organs. Just composite material, held together by modern adhesives and intention. Even the eggs Mawson described, likely round stones or modeled implants, placed for effect. But this time something had changed. Because the public didn't flinch. The headlines came, then vanished. Even parts of the UFO community backed away, calling the stunt embarrassing. Mawson wasn't exposing a mystery anymore. He was repeating a performance. And yet, underneath the spectacle, a deeper pain lingered. What happens when belief becomes too powerful to challenge? When people need the lie to feel true? When identity, wonder, hope are tied to the impossible? Because while fake DNA was trending, real DNA was whispering something else. From the highest cities in the Andes, buried beneath stone altars and freezing wind, scientists were listening to a different signal. One not forged in plaster or fraud, but written into the blood of a people who had survived the impossible. And that blood was hiding something extraordinary. A quiet lab in Lima. What survives isn't just a story. It's a code. The headlines had moved on. But inside the Universidad Nacional Mayor de San Marcos, one of the oldest institutions in the Americas, scientists were decoding something far more sacred than fake mummies. They were studying the living DNA of Peru. From Quechua highlanders, men and women whose ancestors had walked these mountains long before Inca roads were carved, long before Spanish boots ever touched Andean soil. They found something buried in the genes. Not foreign, not alien, but a signature of survival. The EPAS1 mutation, the same gene that lets Tibetan Sherpas survive Everest. Now discovered in the Andes. But with a twist, it wasn't identical. It independently evolved. A parallel mutation. A second miracle. These Quechua families, living above 4,300 meters, had adapted in total silence. No oxygen tanks. No special diets. Just biology, modified by 11,000 years of thin air. The blood of the high Andes doesn't just carry oxygen. It carries defiance. Unlike most people at high altitude, who develop chronic mountain sickness, Quechua and Aymara don't. Their bodies regulate blood pressure, oxygen, and heart rate better than any human population ever recorded. And this wasn't recent. Skeletal remains from Loricoca Cave, dating back to 9,000 BCE, show signs of the same adaptation. That's older than the pyramids, older than writing, a genetic inheritance from a time before history began, not a gift from the sky, a battle fought in every breath. This is the real mystery, that a people forgotten by conquest, buried under myth and lies, carried the greatest proof of evolution on Earth. But EPAS1 wasn't the only story in their blood, because when scientists ran full genome comparisons across modern Quechua, something else lit up. Not a mutation, a connection to a migration that history refuses to explain, a trail that doesn't start in Peru, but ends there. And where it ends is on water. Lake Titicaca, 12,500 feet above sea level, a mirror of the sky, so vast it feels mythic. But what lives on its surface felt impossible. The Uros, families who live on floating islands, hand-woven from tatora reeds, islands that rise, fall, and drift, just like their history. For generations, they've claimed something few believed. We were here before the Inca. before Aymara, before even the stones of Tiahuanaco. But no records proved it. No empire mentioned them. Just oral memory, drifting on water. Until now. In 2018, a breakthrough came from Peru's Universidad Católica and Bolivia's Instituto de Genética Humana. Researchers collected DNA from the Uros people across both sides of the border. The results? Unique mitochondrial haplogroups, distinct from Quechua, Aymara, or any neighboring highland community. One in particular, haplogroup C1D1, a rare variant, showed isolation, long-term genetic separation, as if the Uros had lived not just in another region, but another time. And the Y chromosome data confirmed even further divergence. No signs of recent mixing with nearby groups. This wasn't drift. It was deep ancestry, a lineage untouched by empire. The Uros weren't squatters. They were survivors, a living relic of a time before centralized kings, before temples, before the gods had names. And when the Peruvian government received the findings, something changed. By 2021, Uros leaders had begun presenting their DNA at cultural forums, claiming not just visibility, but sovereignty. Their blood carried proof. Their islands carried continuity. But in a world obsessed with aliens and hoaxes, who listens to the truth? Because while the Uros sailed forward with ancestral pride, the media was still chasing plaster bodies and 30% unknown DNA. And the real question now wasn't scientific. It was spiritual. Can a quiet people, backed by 10,000 years of memory and bone, ever compete with a story written in lights? Or will the truth, even when it floats, be drowned by the myth? But high above the lake, in the Andes, where the clouds skimmed stone and silence, another truth was waiting to be unearthed. Machu Picchu, built in the mid-1400s, abandoned by the 1500s, still one of the world's most mysterious ancient cities, not because of how it looks, but because of who lived and died there. For centuries, the bodies buried around the citadel were labeled simply servants, workers, laborers, the forgotten machinery of the empire. But in 2021, scientists from Yale and Cusco's Regional Historical Museum ran full paleogenomic sequencing on remains recovered in the early 1900s. What they found wasn't uniform. It was a mosaic. These individuals came from everywhere: the Pacific coast, the northern highlands, and shockingly, the Amazon basin. One genome traced to the Peruvian jungle, over 800 kilometers away. Another to the Lake Titicaca region. Another to the north near modern-day Ecuador. Machu Picchu wasn't just a royal retreat. It was genetic convergence, a final resting place for lives drawn in from every corner of Tawantinsuyu, the Inca Empire. The bones didn't just show servitude. They showed identity, interwoven, diverse, and entirely unexpected. Women from the lowlands, buried beside men from the Sierras. Children with dental patterns from the tropics, carrying mitochondrial lineages not seen in Cusco at all. Even in death, they told stories of migration, of displacement, of connection. These weren't footnotes in the empire. They were the living network that made the empire possible. And while the stones of Machu Picchu have always held their silence, the DNA at last began to speak. Not of kings, not of myths, but everyday people, pulled into the orbit of power, then lost to time. So now, the real mystery returns. If these voices waited 500 years to be heard, what else is still buried beneath the bones of Peru? Maybe the better question is, what truth still lives inside them? For years, the headlines screamed about aliens. The Nazca dolls, the three-fingered hoaxes, the elongated Paracas skulls. 30% unknown DNA, they said. Congress displays, YouTube reveals, mummies paraded as extraterrestrial. But in every case, when real scientists stepped in, the verdict was the same. Glue, plaster, rearranged bones, and in the end, Homo sapiens. Every time. Because the lie was never in the DNA. It was in the spectacle. But what slipped through the noise was something far more profound. Real mutations. Real miracles. The EPAS1 gene in Quechua Highlanders, discovered in 2024, enabling survival above 4,000 meters. A separate evolutionary pathway from the Tibetan plateau, born in parallel. No one planted it. No one faked it. It was earned. Then came the Uros, a people dismissed for centuries, proven, through mitochondrial and Y-DNA markers, to be a distinct ancestral group, living proof that oral history can survive even when books forget. And beneath Machu Picchu, the 2021 genomic analysis revealed a capital not of one people, but of many. Servants with Amazonian genes, coastal mothers, highland children, a city made of convergence. These weren't anomalies. They were evidence of movement, memory, adaptation. And maybe that's the final twist. The most powerful DNA stories in Peru aren't about what's foreign. They're about what's been here all along. What makes us human isn't the mystery in our blood. It's the survival of it. Across glaciers, across deserts, across centuries of invasion and erasure. That is the real mutation. And yet, just when we thought we understood the genome's map, another marker appeared. Northern Peru. Inside a sealed tomb in the Lambayeque region. A child skeleton. But the DNA didn't match known lineages. It carried a Eurasian signal. Thousands of years too early. Thousands of miles off course. No head binding. No glue. No spectacle. Just ancient bones and a genome no one expected. What it means could rewrite the story of who first set foot in the Americas. And when. That's where we go next.